Hi guys, welcome back to Tuesday, week 9, session 2, where really our overarching aim this week is to plan and research um, for your speech of your own. Now, we introduced the idea yesterday then that we've already looked at the 3 appeals of rhetoric, so ethos, logos, and pathos. Now that will come into our planning and our own speech writing, but we're also creating a bridge now as we move forward to how we take those separate elements and kind of begin to integrate them into a speech of our own. Now, the arrangement and style is a key part of the writing, but there's no point writing anything until we've completed this stage 1, which is what we're looking at today and yesterday, invention. Now, invention is about planning. There is nothing worse than thinking I'm going to make a really passionate speech about X, Y, and Z, starting well, and then running out of things to say. It exposes the speaker as being unprepared, ill-informed, and immediately alienates the audience. They don't trust you. They don't believe you've got anything credible to say. So the invention, the planning is key in creating that ethos, that credible, trustworthy face that this is somebody that cares about what they're talking about. This is somebody that's passionate and somebody that's done research. Okay, so we are looking at building on that invention. Now, if you remember, as we're modeling this process, I've given us a shared topic. So as we model the process of invention and planning, we're using the shared topic of child labour, okay? So our starter today is a reading task that's going to be designed to illustrate what invention can involve. So how do we plan a topic? Okay, so we have here, oh no, I can just see what I've done. Okay, I'll try and fix that for us guys in a minute. A website from UNICEF. Now, UNICEF for every child. So this is a credible source of information. So sometimes when we're planning speeches, we do need to go on we need to research. We need to use the internet, books, other sources of information. So we saw yesterday that an appeal to logos, an appeal to people's reasoning, is the ability to find credible sources of information. So what's making UNICEF a credible source of information? Well, it says up here, UNICEF for every child. Now, we know that UNICEF is a huge world-recognized charity that works in this area of children's care, looking after children, protecting children. So they're immediately ticking lots of boxes for being credible sources of information. So UNICEF, tick, tick, tick. So I've got 5 questions here. All of the answers come from these 2 paragraphs. So research isn't just about copying and pasting. Okay, and a good speaker will not copy and paste because there's going to come a point when you have to learn your speech. And if you're trying to learn huge elements of copy and pasted information, it's not going to sound like you. You're going to lose that authenticity. You're going to lose that credible voice. So we've got 5 questions here that are going to give us the answer, the information, which they're going to turn into our own credible voice. So I'm going to just read to you the paragraphs, and then you're going to answer the questions for your starters today, okay? Millions of children around the world are trapped in child labour, depriving them of their childhood, their health and education, and condemning them to a life of poverty and want. Of course, there is work that children do to help their families in ways that are neither harmful nor exploitative. But many children are stuck in unacceptable work for children, a serious violation of their rights. Recent global estimates based on data of UNICEF, the ILO and the World Bank indicate that 168 million children aged 5 to 17 are engaged in child labour. Millions of them suffer in the other worst forms of child labour, including slavery and slavery-like practices such as forced and bonded labour and child soldiering, sexual exploitation, or are used by adults in illicit activities, including drug trafficking. So guys, in a minute, you're going to pause. You can reread that yourself in your own pace, and you're going to answer these 5 questions for me, okay? What 3 things are children deprived of? What are they condemned to? Question 3, what kind of work isn't harmful? Question 4, how many children are engaged in child labour? And question 5, can you name one of the worst forms of child labour? Okay, so just press pause and get your answers and we'll mark them together in a minute. So that's our reading starter, our retrieval starter. Okay, guys, off you go. Okay, guys, so everything we're writing down, we can use as we refine our speeches and come up with our ideas today. So, number one, what three things are children deprived of? Brilliant. In that opening sentence, they're deprived of their childhood, their health, and education. So, in other words, deprived means what are they prevented from doing? What are they stopped from doing? So, child labour stops children from having a childhood. It can stop them from developing health in a healthy way. That could be in terms of growth, or that potentially the labour they're involved in can harm their health. And they're prevented from having an education because, guys, if they're working, they're not in school. So if you've got those three things, brilliant, give them a tick. If you didn't, make sure you just write them down now. Now, what are they deprived, of? We've done that one. What are they condemned to? Now, condemned is this powerfully emotive verb choice. Remember, we talked about pathos, appealing to people's emotions. This text, even though it's not a speech, is still using pathos. It's still using some really powerful vocabulary to appeal to our emotions. And condemned means to be eternally kind of damned, and you are going to have to do this forever. Condemned means something that you're put into forever. Okay? They are condemned to a life of, brilliant, poverty and want. So actually, without education, without good health, without being able to be happy children, it has an impact on their future, and it condemns them to a life of poverty. So having no money, okay, having very low income, so they're condemned to a life of poverty and want. In other words, they're going to want always. They're going to be looking around them and wanting what they cannot have and needing what they cannot have. So the outcome for children that are involved in child labour is terrible. Okay, so what kind of work isn't harmful? So they do talk about, okay, that there's a kind of work that isn't harmful. Did you find it? Brilliant. Okay, there is work that children do to help their families. So there is some work about helping families that isn't harmful. So this isn't about saying children aren't to work at all, but it's about making that line, championing work that isn't harmful or exploitative, like helping their families, whilst also protecting them from work that is harmful and exploitative. Because we don't want to sentence these children, we don't want to condemn them to a life of poverty and want. Brilliant. Now, this second paragraph then, well, what answers have we got? So how many children are engaged in child labour? Brilliant. It indicates, it estimates 168 million children aged 5 to 17 are engaged in child labour. Well, just stop and think about that in a minute. 168 million. Our school, I love our school, but we know from the recent charity we did, didn't we, is 749 roughly, and that's with adults. Imagine if that rather than a school, each and every one of you as students, because you would be aged 5 to 17, were involved in child labour. That you were deprived of your childhood, your health, your education, that you're being forced to work in harmful and exploitative ways. Now, 749 goes into 168 million, a lot more than I can do the maths of. But that is a huge amount of children around the world, isn't it? So that's how many. That also then begins to give us our fact, our first fact. So now by researching, we've got factual information. We can start to develop our ideas. Now, it does talk about the worst forms of child labour. Okay, so it does recognise that there is almost like a grading system, that certain forms of child labour are worse than others. And there's a list of the worst forms. So you just needed to come up with one. Okay, so it could be slavery, soldiering, bonded forced labour, exploitation, drug trafficking. So those are the worst forms of child labour. Okay, so hopefully you've got some really good ideas now that we can use as we move forward. Okay, so we are, as a shared example, developing and planning. We're doing the invention side of a planned speech on engaging with this topic, that we have a moral duty to do everything we can to stand against child labour across the world. Now, from that starter, we've now got factual information, 168 million children. We can now talk about it with a little bit more credibility and expertise because we've done a little bit of research, and that was just a starting point. Yep, if we'd have gone further down the research avenue, we would have seen a lot more. Okay, and it says here that childhood is a precious time, and it's not good enough to passively ignore the fact that across the world, children work in dangerous and difficult jobs. Okay, so we'd already started to think about that yesterday. Now through that research task, we've got more information to build into it. Okay, so we then also came up with our own ideas yesterday. So we've got 3 ideas why child labour is wrong, and we've got potentially 2 that we disagree with. Okay, so I'm just reminding you of where we've been. All right, my lovelies. So this is just again to back up what we've said. So reasons why child labour is wrong. In Africa and India, there are high numbers of children working in dangerous jobs. We can now use our fact. It's estimated that 168 million children worldwide are involved in child labour. Many children are forced to work in factories, in the clothing industry, in the carpet industry. Many are involved in bonded labour, modern slavery. Okay, now the problem with that is why does it continue? Because it does contribute to the wealth in Western world. Developed countries are getting money from this. Okay, they are gaining in wealth at the expense of children. And we might say, therefore, that we have a moral duty to safeguard all children. And as we began to talk about yesterday, arguments against child slave, why we can't do anything, but it doesn't actually happen in this country. And we feel powerless to make a difference. Now, guys, we've actually got from our first bit of research a counter argument already. If somebody says it doesn't happen in this country, we could use one of the worst forms of child labour, drug trafficking, actually to say, well, it is happening in this country. We do know that increasing numbers of children in certain areas of deprivation are being involved in drug trafficking. So actually child labour and exploitation does occur in this country. And although we might feel powerless to make a difference, this isn't about what we feel. We can't do things based on what we feel. We do things based on what's right. Okay, so that's kind of, so we've got our little bit of research, and we've got 5 ideas. So what do we start to do with that? And that's what we're going to look at next, okay?